Welcome to the first of what I hope to be a thorough series on Tess's races for roleplay in the game Elder Scrolls Online. First on the list will be the eponymous Imperials of the series. Their culture, history, politics, technology, and military, which led them to near-complete Tamrielic domination and their eventual downfall to petty rump states. Their story begins as the Nedic and Syro-Nordic tribesmen of what would come to be called Cyrodiil in the Merethic era. There are many theories as to where the Needs came from, some saying they came from Atmora, others saying that they were native. But what we do know is by the time that the alien invaders came, they were the well-established dominant race of the area by then. Unfortunately for them, this would not last, as the Daedra-worshipping aliens would soon enslave them en masse, and take over most of Cyrodiil by this point. This was not an easy time for man, as the aliens were far from benevolent taskmasters and often acted in a cruel manner to their slaves. Wholesale slaughter, horrible experiments from necromantic sacrifices to corpse gardens created a class of extremely unhappy human slaves under their masters. This would not last long, as in 1E242, the human slaves rebelled and threw off the yoke of alien rule in a very violent rebellion known as the Alessian Slave Revolt, which started as a small uprising in Sardavar Lead, but quickly exploded into a full-scale conflict against the elves. Mankind had a common goal of freedom, giving them all the advantage in morale and perseverance. However, the aliens, on the contrary, were made up of fractured and often competing city-states, which had a hard time coordinating to stop this threat. By the time they started banding together to stop the slave revolt, it was far too late. White gold fell for the first time in history to mankind, and Tamriel would finally change forever from a predominantly elven-ruled society to one ruled by the young and nascent race of man. One of the most enduring changes that occurred after this event was the many religious ones, and how people would forever worship the divines on Tamriel. Alessia was granted the Amulet of Kings via Akatosh, dragon god of time, and with his covenant, all who bear the blood of Alessia would forever keep the gates of oblivion closed, of whom the aliens often relied on their power from, so long as a Dragonborn Emperor sat on the throne of white gold. Such an event created what is now known as the Eight Divines, a pantheon made up of the Adric elven gods that had been so deeply ingrained in the hearts of the Needs, and a mix of the Nordic gods. Human-worshipped Adra that would come to bring valuable northern allies from Skyrim to find this pantheon acceptable. Of course, a few changes in names and acceptability of these deities were made, but in the end, this same pantheon has been worshipped for thousands of years in the near exact configuration. With this, Alessia became Empress of Cyrodiil, and those who revolted against the elves became the Imperials. With Cyrodiil completely under the Imperium of man, so too did come radical changes. First and foremost was the rise of the Alessian Order, which had exploded into popularity. This was an anti-intellectual, anti-mirror, and extremely pro-human priesthood, which, as many in the future would claim, brought a dark age to Tamriel. They pushed out the rest of the vassal aliens, genociding many while others fled to the south to escape the brutality of man. The Alessians also performed strange and esoteric rituals which not only expunged all elven influence from the gods, but brought about a dragon break, which caused an event called the Middle Dawn. All the while, the excesses of the Nibonese often disturbed the Colovian Syro-Nordic western half of the empire further and further. Hierarch was soon incorporated into the empire, as well as southern Skyrim, but soon the westerners had had enough at this time, and simply broke off from the now bloated and corrupt Alessian Empire, and became the Colovian Estates, which were made up of Skingrad, Coral, Such, Anvil, and Kvatch, with other small petty kingdoms making up the estates. Skingrad had just gotten a new ruler, Dorold Laric, who was a staunch supporter of the Alessians and immediately ceded his kingdom to them following his ascent. Further actions infuriated not only the populace but his brother, Prince Rizlov, and he was soon beheaded by the latter. These actions caused direct conflict with the Alessians, who was led by Emperor Gorias himself to besiege the city. Rizlov, using advanced tactics for the time, was able to utterly annihilate the Alessian advancement and begin the War of Righteousness, which would see the Alessian Empire forever on its downward spiral. The Empire collapsed in 1E2331, after over 2,000 years of Alessian rule, about 500 years longer reigning than the real-life Roman Empire, and thus began an interregnum, which cut off Cyrodiil from most of Tamriel to sort its own affairs. In this time, the groundworks for the modern Imperial culture were laid down. Colovians and Nibonese. Both distanced themselves and thus began developing very distinct ways of life. However, about 400 years after the fall of the Alessian Empire, a fractured Cyrodiil would need to come together. The Akaviri invaded. The Akaviri were extremely militarily advanced compared to the Imperials at this time. New shiny weapons and armor, better tactics that utterly annihilated anything mainland Tamriel could handle, and distinct elite units which outpaced anything at the time. They were a force to be reckoned with. The Akaviri cut bloody swaths through Skyrim and arrived in Pale Pass, just between the former and Cyrodiil. This is where one man made a difference. Riemann. A Colovian who had just taken the Ruby Throne for the first time in over 300 years, had disparate factions to rally to his support if he wanted to even test these invaders. After having both the Colovians and Nibonese cooperate, he marched his army up to Pale Pass and met these enemies. They clashed, and the battle lasted until Riemann used the Voice, a power innate to all Dragonborn. The Akaviri all stopped fighting, bowed down, and Riemann was proclaimed Dragonborn, and therefore who they'd serve. Riemann took these eastern peoples under his banner, and created a new breed of Imperial. Tactically powerful, armed and armored in a fusion of the old Tamrielic way and the new Eastern style, and most importantly, extremely disciplined. This created the modern Imperial Legion, a perfect balance of Tamriel's native peoples and a new foreign infusion that gave them the edge. Akaviri peoples quickly rose the ranks in both politics, the military, and even had extreme influence over the emperors at large, many practically ruling for them. Soon the nations of man banded together under the Second Empire and conquered all the lands belonging to the Altmer, Khajiit, Bosmer, and finally, and tenuously, the mysterious Argonians. Emperors came and went under this golden age of imperial rule, but all good things must come to an end. A centuries-long war with Morrowind, which was the only non-imperial land at this point, had come to a head, ending with a truce. This fact brought the Morag Tong assassins into the picture, whom some say that Akaviri hired to kill the last emperor of the Riemann line. The Second Empire now had no Dragonborn on its throne, and potentate Versidue Shai, whom acted sort of like a Grand Chancellor, took the throne as potentate and ruled. The potentate announced the Second Era upon his ascension, and soon after him his son faced economic problems which was caused by the strain of managing a continental empire. To alleviate these issues, the Guild Act was formed, bringing the Fighters and Mages Guild into the fold to further modernize the Empire and keep the legions focused on more important tasks than killing goblins. Soon, the very blade that allegedly brought the potentates to their throne turned on them, and both Akaviri rulers were slain. The Second Empire exploded into strife. The interregnum era began. Petty warlords rose, alliances were formed, the empire began falling apart. Many took the throne but lacked the skill to hold on to it long enough to make an impact. That was until an unlikely people invaded, the Reachmen. They took Cyrodiil by storm and created a new barbaric dynasty for themselves, the Longhouse. This was the last straw for most of Tamriel, and if they hadn't already, by now most of the provinces had seceded from the waning imperial influence of Cyrodiil to take matters into their own hands. The Daggerfall Covenant formed to fight back the Reachmen invasion and deal with more personal matters in High Rock. The Aldemary Dominion formed in response to both Valenwood and elsewhere seeking allies due to the increasingly unstable Imperial government nearing collapse. And finally, the Ebonheart Pact was formed due to a second invasion of Akaviri coming into Morrowind, which threatened all of North and East Tamriel. These alliances would set the trend for the Second Era, being an age of war and rejection of the Imperial culture. A certain Colovian Duke of Coral by the name of Varen Acalario sought to take the throne from the ruling foreigners due to increasingly revolting laws involving public Daedra worship. Soon he took the Imperial City, personally killing the reigning emperor in combat and crowning himself ruler of all Cyrodiil. In only 40 years, the Longhouse dynasty collapsed, which pathetically was the longest-lasting ruling party in Cyrodiil at this time. Varen soon felt that he lacked any legitimacy, and with the help of Mannimarco, sought to become Dragonborn. However, this was a ploy of Mannimarco all along, and by using the Amulet of Kings, Mannimarco ravaged Varen's body and brought hell upon Tamriel. The single most destructive event to ever occur had sprung, the soulburst. Molag Bal, god of rape, had been let loose upon Tamriel. His cult spread everywhere under Mannimarco's new influence over the Empire, and thousands upon thousands of innocent people were brought under the heel of the Daedra. This is the exact period we will examine for the Imperials. Firstly, it would be astute to cover the misnomer of the Imperial race, as this is a term about as descriptive of saying an American. There is no real Imperial race. Rather, this is a simple way to categorize the Cyrodiils, who have two main distinct ethnic and cultural backgrounds, the Nibonese and the Colovians. We'll start with the Nibonese, as they are often the less understood of the two. They inhabit eastern Cyrodiil, near towards Morrowind and Blackmarsh, which incorporates Bruma, Reville, Leyawiin, and Shadenhall. The Nibonese are often considered the closest and purest relatives to the Needs on Tamriel, and they only really ethnically differentiate with the Needs in that they have some very distant alien blood in them, if any. As the Argonians and Khajiit neighbors of the Nibonese cannot interbreed with them, and Skyrim and Morrowind are fairly cut off due to the mountains. The Nibonese have a rich history which mostly consists of their adherence to the Elysian doctrines, and their vast amounts of minor cults venerating anything from heroes to saints. Even the act of saint-eating was performed by these people at times, which consisted of ingesting the ashes or fetishes of long-dead saints. Nibonese are also famed for their mercantile history, which actually began due to a law in the Elysian doctrines prohibiting agricultural development. This silver tongue, as many call it, has been famed across Tamriel as one of the best tools they have for both trade and politics. Their appreciation for magic is also not to be understated, as they are often the first of the two groups to adopt it. Nibonese dress often reflects this, with heavy use of enchantable materials such as silk, gold, and bronze. Cinch skins are also popular on more extravagant clothes, as is the use of exotic materials such as newt scale and dragon scale. In the end, I think this shows a lot about Nibonese values on the whole. They value the arts, culture, and magic, making up the legendary mercantile skill of the Imperials through the art of charm and sophistication, something their Western brothers generally lack. Speaking of their Western brothers, it's time to talk about the Colovians. The Colovian West has always sought to distinguish itself from its more extravagant Eastern brothers. They embrace a strong martial and maritime tradition inherited from their neighbors, especially the Nords, and are the backbone of Cyrodiil's agricultural industry, especially famed for the production of Flynn and Cyrodiilic brandy. The Colovians are extremely devout to the Eight Divines, possibly the most adherent to them in all of Tamriel, and they almost never stoop to the worship of Daedra. Those who do are called the Woeful Colovians, and are often shunned by society at large. Colovians value hard work, honesty, the rule of law, and the Empire's well-being above all else, which consequently led them to becoming the backbone of the Imperial Legion. Young men and women here are often the most fit and eager for service in the Ruby ranks. Many of the later emperors in Tamriel history, from Riemann to Mede, have been Colovian, attesting to their leadership capabilities. Colovians are not so extravagant as their eastern relatives. They prefer furs, leather, linen, and other more common but rugged materials which help them endure the equally more rugged terrain of western Tamriel. Most notoriously being the famed Colovian arrowcatcher hat. The Colovians clearly value the frontiersman lifestyle of their Nordic ancestors, most of their trades and interests being not urban-focused but rather on the frontiers. This makes them natural candidates for the Legion, as a life of adventure is what any true Colovian would want. It's clear that the Imperial race as a whole, however, would never have succeeded without one hand washing the other. Nibonese and Colovians perfectly balance each other out in a way that they may not even fully appreciate. Imperials as a whole have lived under the Empire for most of their existence, of which has brought both rule of law and stability as commonplace to their lives. Politically in this era, the Empire effectively does not exist, and the Imperials have gone their own ways. Many live as freebooters in the Dural Mountains. Some have fled to petty kingdoms in Colovia. Others have formed rump states that claim legitimacy over the legacy of Riemann's empire, or joined one of the major three banners to stake their claim in. A major Imperial holdout is Leyawiin in this era, which houses most of the members of the now dissolved Elder Council. During this time, the Imperials are at their lowest point, with most of the ones still in the Heartlands being part of the vile Worm Cult, and the others just trying to stay alive. The only remaining Imperial institutions at this time that have gone undestroyed or dissolved seems to be the Fighters Guild and Mages Guild. Major Imperial cities include Bruma, which has been almost completely destroyed by the Worm Cult. Coral, which has a massive chasm filled with lava in it due to the soulburst. Shadenhall, which is currently in a rebellion involving the Thorn-aligned legions and the town militia who'd had enough. Reville, which had been sacked by a legion after the soulburst. More than half the populace killed, and the city burned, no longer serving any strategic importance. Worst for wear is the Imperial City, epicenter of the soulburst and the most corrupted place on Tamriel at this time. Daedra walked the streets as the city slowly melts into Cold Harbor, creating a horrible place of torture, rape, and mass murder. Very little people survive here, who are not either part of the cult or else a member of one of the banners attempting to capture the city. Most of these settlements are completely uninhabitable by now, with the large majority of Imperials picking more secure lanes in Cyrodiil to stay. First is Sunny Anvil, which had its count deposed by Pirate Queen Fortunata. Her gang of criminals currently occupy the city, but both Kvatch, the Gold Coast Trade Company, and other parties want a piece of the city for themselves. Kvatch is second only to Leyawen in security. It's a proud Colovian city which drove out the Worm Cult early on thanks to the Order of the Hour keeping watch of things. The Count of the city, Carolus, is cousin to the late Emperor Varen, whom had built a massive wall to block off the Gold Coast from the rest of Cyrodiil, in order to protect it from invasion. Finally, Leyawen, which is arguably the most well-preserved of the Imperial cities thanks to the Ivory Brigade. It houses many retired members of the Elder Council, but it also sits in a dangerous position without many allies it can call upon. Imperials, even at this time however, are some of the most technologically advanced peoples on Tamriel. Besides the Mananaut project, which saw men of the Empire travel the stars, the Imperials have reverse-engineered many dwarven weapons for use, such as crossbows and ballista. Imperial weapons and armor are some of the most widespread across Tamriel, favoring sword and shield play and highly flexible infantry. Imperials also boast a fairly competent cavalry, with anvil chargers being a favorite for their knights, along with the use of sarissas and spears. Overall, the Imperials are an extremely well-rounded fighting force, which not only has the best disciplined men in Tamriel, but also incorporates both excellent ranged skirmishers and heavy infantry to very effective degrees. Even their forts in Cyrodiil are constantly rebuilt in their same format as before, as the alliances find them the most tactically advantageous designs they can use, rather than something from home. On a roleplay related note, the Imperials are one of the most diverse and fun races to play as in Elder Scrolls Online. They are not associated with any of the three factions, making them free to have many possible backstories or character archetypes in their retinue. Paralleling this, the Imperials also have an extremely diverse skill set. Sword and Shield Legionaries are a favorite. Thieves, assassins, priests, healers, almost nothing is off limits to the Imperials. Generally, however, they tend to be more civilized than the other races, so things like druids or barbarians are quite uncommon in their lands, though gladiators tend to be a very popular choice. Many would assume Imperials are simply just Romans, and while this is not an unfair statement, it is also a very superficial one. Firstly, Imperials are extremely proficient in trade, commerce, and diplomacy, three things the Romans were terrible at. While the Romans were a civilization of conquest and agriculture, the Imperials are one of trade and diplomacy first and foremost, similar to the British Empire and its methods of colonizing via the use of Imperial-sanctioned companies. They also have a deep Japanese Empire influence given the introduction of the Akaviri, especially notable in the form of the Blades or Dragon Guard. Even the position of Emperor in the context of the Imperials is much like that of the Chinese and Japanese Emperor, in that they are a divine being, head of state and religion, and are divinely mandated to rule via the covenant with Akatosh. Even the Longhouse dynasty is reminiscent of the Yuan dynasty of China, made up of the Mongol conquerors. In the end, I like to think the Imperials are as empire incarnate. They lack the brutality of Rome, no crucifixion or slavery at all. Given their past, indeed, slavery is often a very heated topic for Imperials who have never considered it morally right in any capacity. Imperials also value freedom of press, and house many literary institutions and newspapers for just such a thing. These all combined make them much more than just Romans. They are Imperials, and they are Cyrodiil come. Thank you all for watching this video. It was real fun to make this one, and I hope we'll be able to make a ton more lore videos in the future. Please like and subscribe, and big shout out and thanks to UESP for a lot of the information here. See you next time when I do another race.